My name is Maren Holloway. I'm 34. And the night my father's chest was opened on a surgical table in Columbus, Ohio, the device they were putting inside him had my initials etched into the firmware. He didn't know that. He still doesn't, not really. 12 years ago, at a Thanksgiving table in Ashford, in front of every cousin who would carry the story home, he told me my engineering degree was a useless piece of paper bought with money he never should have signed off on. He said it twice, because the first time the room had laughed, and he wanted to be sure they laughed for the right reason. He told me real engineers build things you can kick. You can kick a pacemaker, once. Then it stops you. I drove home that night with my hands at 10 and 2, and I didn't cry until I'd reached the county line, not because the words surprised me. Because they didn't. I had been waiting for them, the way you wait for a tooth you already know is dead to finally come out. This story is about what happened in the 12 years between that Thanksgiving and a hospital corridor at 2:47 in the morning, when I stood holding a chart I'd personally signed off on. While inside an operating room, the man who had spent my whole life calling my work make-believe had his heart restarted by a device my team built. I'm not going to tell you I planned it. I didn't. The world is not that small or that just. But I'm going to tell you exactly how I got from that kitchen to that corridor, what I almost did, what I didn't do, and the one sentence my grandmother said on a Tuesday afternoon that kept me from making the worst mistake of my career. If you've ever been the smartest person at a table where being smart was treated like a personal insult, this story is for you. Hit subscribe if you want to stay. I'm not going anywhere until you've heard the whole thing. Because what I did next, they didn't expect it. And what I did not do after, that's the part nobody in my family is ready to talk about even now. You have to understand who my father was before this story makes sense. Or who he had been. Because there were two of him, and somewhere between them, I lost track of which one was real. When I was 9, I built a balsa wood bridge for the elementary school science fair. I had stayed up 2 nights gluing the joints with a thin, clear glue that smelled like nail polish remover. And I had calculated, in pencil, in a spiral notebook, the load it was supposed to bear. 12 ounces. I tested it on the kitchen floor with a stack of quarters and a coffee mug, and it had held. I was so proud of that bridge, I refused to let anyone else carry it to the car. It collapsed in the gym in front of everyone, under 9 ounces. Judge wrote, "Excellent attempt" on my card. My classmates clapped politely. My father loaded the broken pieces into a paper grocery bag and walked me to the truck. I cried the whole way home, quiet crying. The kind where you keep trying to swallow it and it keeps coming back up. He pulled into a Sunoco off Route 30. He went inside. He came back with a chocolate milk and a folded napkin. He set the milk on my knee and he said, "Bridges fall, bug. That's how engineers learn which ones don't." I carried that sentence in my pocket for the next 20 years. I wrote it on the inside of my notebook in 8th grade. I taped it to the inside of my dorm room desk drawer in college. When my first prototype shorted out on the testing bench in my second year as a junior engineer, and I locked myself in a stairwell to cry, I said it out loud to myself in his voice. "Bridges fall, bug." I don't know when he stopped meaning it. Somewhere between that Sunoco and a Thanksgiving banquet hall, he got lost. And I, for the longest time, kept calling out the way you call out for someone in fog. Convinced he just couldn't hear me yet. That's the part of this story that hurts the most. Not what he said at the table. The fact that I had once been his bug. My mother is named Lois. My brother is named Rhett. Rhett is 2 years younger than me, and he was the kind of son my father had wanted. Loud, quick with his hands, never seen reading a book for pleasure. Rhett took over the family driveway sealing business when he was 21, and our father wore the company sweatshirt to the grocery store every Saturday for 15 years. He did not own a sweatshirt with my employer's name on it. I had offered twice. Both times he laughed. My mother loved me. I want to be honest about that. She loved me and she did not protect me, and those two facts lived inside her the way two animals can live in the same cage without ever looking at each other directly. She had a habit of starting sentences with, "I'm sure he didn't mean," and never finishing them. Because she could not. Because he had meant it. I would watch her say half a sentence and then refold a dish towel, and I knew the dish towels was where the rest of the sentence had gone. There was a Tupperware container under her kitchen sink. A blue one, the kind they don't make anymore. She kept his old prescription bottles in it. He had been on blood thinners for 6 years already by the time of the Thanksgiving I'm going to tell you about. I knew the names of the drugs. I knew because I read everything and because his medications had crept onto the labels of devices my own employer was building. He didn't know I knew. He thought of his pills the way some men think of their wallet: private property, none of your business, and don't bring it up at dinner. I just wanted him to be proud of me. That's the smaller, sadder version of this whole story, and I'm going to say it once and not pretend otherwise. I just wanted him to be proud of me. I was 32 years old before I admitted to my therapist that I had built a career partly to make him stop laughing. She had set down her pen and said, "That's a very expensive way to chase a sentence that's never coming." I had laughed because the alternative was to cry, and her office had no tissues left. Here are 3 things that happened before that Thanksgiving, in case you think I am exaggerating. When I was 22, I co-signed a personal loan with him for a used truck. He was the primary borrower. I was a college student with a 780 credit score because I had paid my own rent for 3 years on a barista's paycheck. He missed 4 payments in the first 8 months. I made up the difference out of my graduation savings. I did not tell anyone. The truck was a Ford F-150 in a color called stone gray metallic. He kept it for 9 years and gave it to Rhett. When I was 28, I wired my mother $4,000 for what she called a plumbing emergency. There was no plumbing emergency. The money paid for Rhett's last semester of community college, which he did not finish. I learned about it 3 Christmases later, from an aunt who assumed I'd been told. When I was 30, my father refused to attend the open house at the research facility where I had just been promoted to project lead. The invitation had been mailed to my parents' address. He told my mother in the kitchen, when he thought I wasn't there, that he wasn't going to spend a Saturday afternoon pretending to understand make-believe. I was in the hallway. I had come back for my coat. I left without it. I drove 3 hours back to Columbus in a sleeveless dress in November. I have not driven that route in a sleeveless dress since. There were warning signs all along, and I rationalized every one of them. He didn't come to my master's hooding ceremony. He had work. He didn't text me on the day my first patent was approved. He doesn't really do texts. He had attended every one of Rhett's parking lot grand openings. And one year he had sat on the hood of a brand new ceiling truck for a photo that ran in the Ashford Sentinel under the headline, "Father and Son Keep Family Business Rolling." Maybe I was overthinking it. I was not overthinking it. I was overworking it. I was trying to retrofit a reality that the data did not support. In engineering, when your model disagrees with your measurements, you trust the measurements. In families, somehow, we keep trusting the model. I want to tell you one more thing before the wound, because if I don't, you won't know what it cost me to walk back into that Thanksgiving. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was named Ruth Ainsley, and she had been a high school physics teacher in Linden, Pennsylvania for 31 years. She was the reason I knew what an engineer was. She had given me my first slide rule on my 8th birthday, wrapped in newspaper, with a card that said, in her teacher's handwriting, "For Maren, the world is built by people who can read it." Ruth had a habit, when my father got loud, of going very, very quiet. She would set down whatever she was holding. She would look at him the way you look at a barometer just before a storm. And she would say something so short and so dry that the room had to repeat it twice before realizing it had been a knife. She was at that Thanksgiving. She heard every word. And what she said after, in the parking lot, in the cold, while my mother fussed with her scarf and my father loaded leftovers into the truck. That's the sentence that I want you to remember, because it shows up again at the worst moment of my life, 12 years later, in a hallway with no windows. She said, "He's going to need you one day." And on that day, you remember who you are. Not who he told you that you were. She was 73 years old. She was right. Thanksgiving. Ashford, Ohio, the 4th Thursday of November, 1:45 in the afternoon. It had snowed overnight, the wet kind that turns into slush by noon, and the driveway to my parents' house was on gray smear with tire tracks down the middle. I parked behind my uncle's Buick. I sat in the car for a minute with the heater on and watched my own breath fog the inside of the windshield. I was wearing a deep green sweater I had bought at an outlet mall the week before, because my mother had said on the phone that the family was trying to be a little nicer this year, dress-wise. I had ironed it. The sweater. I had ironed a sweater. That should tell you how badly I wanted that afternoon to go well. I had also brought a Pyrex dish of scalloped potatoes with Gruyere, which my mother had asked me to make because the recipe used to belong to Ruth, and Ruth was coming up from Pennsylvania for the first time in 3 years. The kitchen smelled like roasted onions and clove. My mother had a Bing Crosby record on low. My brother was leaning against the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room with a Coors Light in his hand, telling a story about a customer who had paid him in $20 bills. My father was at the head of the table in his good blue shirt with the collar a little crooked. My Aunt Pat was already seated. My Uncle Roy was wiping his glasses with a paper napkin. There were 10 of us, 10 chairs, 11 place settings because my mother always set one extra. She had her reasons. Ruth came in last. She had taken the train and then a cab. She was wearing a black wool coat she had owned since 1991. She set a bag of dinner rolls on the counter. She looked at me. She nodded. We sat and we said the prayer. We started eating. I want to tell you the rest of this the way it happened, in real time, because if I summarize it, you will not feel what I felt. The first hour was fine. It was the kind of fine that families specialize in. My mother asked my brother about his trucks. My brother told the same Coors Light story for my aunt that he had told me in the doorway. My Uncle Roy told a long, slow joke about a Methodist pastor and a parking meter. My father drank one beer. He poured a second. He didn't ask me anything. It was during the second pass at the Green Beans that he turned to my cousin Daniel and asked Daniel what he was studying at school. Daniel was 20. He said he was going into business management at the community college. My father nodded approvingly. He said, "Good. Good. Real degree, real money in that, real work." He turned to me. He said, "You hear that, Maren? Daniel's gonna actually use his." The whole table laughed. The small, uncomfortable laugh that is the sound of people choosing not to disagree with the person at the head of the table. I set my fork down. I looked at my mother. My mother folded her napkin and unfolded it. I said very evenly, "My degree is in biomedical engineering, Dad. I do use it every day." He smiled. He has this smile he saves for me. It's not warm. It's the smile of a man who has rehearsed a line and is waiting to deliver it. He said, "Right. Right. The computer thing, the little chips." I said, "They're not little chips. He cut me off. He said, "Maren, honey, real engineers build things you can kick. You build make-believe." The room was quiet for half a second. Then my brother laughed. My uncle laughed too, late, the way you laugh when you've missed the joke and want to belong. My aunt looked into her wine glass. I said nothing. He said, "Useless degree." He said it like punctuation. Then he said, the part I have replayed in my head 1,000 times. He said it looking right at me, with the Bing Crosby record still going in the next room, and the smell of cloves still in the air, and Ruth, sitting 2 seats down from him with her hands flat on the table on either side of her plate, the way she used to sit when a student in her physics class had said something she was about to correct very, very slowly. He said, "Useless degree, useless girl. I want you to understand something about being publicly humiliated by a parent in front of a room you cannot leave. It is not loud. It is not red. It is gray. The room goes gray at the edges, and your hearing goes a little tinny, and you become extremely aware of small things. The sound of the radiator. The seam of the green sweater under your arm. The way your own pulse is in your fingertips. You do not cry, because crying would confirm his story. You do not yell, because yelling would confirm a different story you are equally unwilling to live inside. Every part of me wanted to stand up, wanted to lift the Pyrex dish of scalloped potatoes and walk it to the trash and let it slide off the spoon into the bag while the whole table watched, the cheese still bubbling. Every part of me wanted to say, "Look at me, look at me, look at me." I didn't. I picked up my fork, I cut a piece of turkey, I put it in my mouth, I chewed. For the first time in my life, restraint felt like power. It did not feel good. Let me be honest about that. It felt like swallowing glass. But it was mine. He could take the room. He could not take what I did with my own face. I looked up once after I had finished chewing. I looked at Ruth. She was looking at my father. She had set down her fork. She had set her hands flat on the table on either side of her plate. She had gone very, very still. And she was looking at my father the way she had once told me. She looked at the eclipse of 1979. Full attention, no expression, like she was watching something burn itself out at a distance. I knew then that she was not going to let it pass. She did not let it pass. 20 minutes later in the parking lot, with the cold blowing across the slush, and my mother fussing with Ruth's scarf, Ruth waited until my father had walked around to the driver's side of his truck. She waited until my mother had stepped back. She turned to me. She held my left wrist with her right hand, the lightest grip, the way you hold the wrist of a child you are about to send into a busy street, and she said, "He's going to need you one day. And on that day, you remember who you are, not who he told you that you were." She did not blink. I drove 3 hours back to Columbus that night. I did not cry until I had crossed the county line. When I did, I cried so hard I had to pull onto the shoulder of Route 33 with my hazards on. A trooper stopped to check on me. He was very kind. He thought I'd hit a deer. I told him I was fine. He said, "Ma'am, are you sure?" I said, "I'm sure." He stayed parked behind me with his lights on until I got back on the road. "I want you to remember the green sweater. I want you to remember the smell of cloves. I want you to remember Ruth's hand on my wrist in the parking lot. Because all three of them come back. I'd love to tell you that I went home and made a plan. I didn't. For 6 weeks after that Thanksgiving, I did not call my parents, not because I was protesting, because I genuinely could not think of one sentence I wanted to say. What I did do in those 6 weeks was work. I worked the way some people drink. I left my apartment at 6:15 in the morning and came back at 9:30 at night with a tea I had forgotten to finish in the car. I was at the time a senior firmware engineer on a project we were calling, internally with the dryness only engineers have, the next one, the next pacemaker. A small, dense thing that was supposed to be smarter than the last generation by a significant margin and quieter. And this was the part the cardiologists kept asking about, kinder to the tissue around it. I want to take a minute on what I actually did because if I don't, you'll think this is a movie. It isn't. The work was incremental. The work was 100,000 small decisions made by 28 people in a building outside Columbus that smelled, faintly, like old coffee and new electronics. My piece, my specific piece, was the section of firmware that decided in real time when the device would deliver a pacing pulse and when it would hold off. It is not a glamorous job. It is the work of asking over and over, is this a real heartbeat or is this noise that looks like one? The signal is messy. The cost of being wrong is a human being. You learn very quickly in that field that you do not get to be casual about the difference between what you think you saw and what was actually there. I bring that up because it became, by accident, the lens I started looking at my own family through. What had I actually seen at that table, and what had I told myself I'd seen? I had seen a man call his daughter useless. I had spent a decade telling him he was just blunt. The measurement disagreed with the model. I had been trusting the model. I told my husband, Tate, about it 3 days after Thanksgiving in our kitchen at midnight while I was making myself a piece of toast I did not eat. Tate is a high school history teacher. He has the particular patience of a man who spends his days explaining to teenagers why their grandparents made the choices they made. He listened. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he said one thing. He said, "You're allowed to stop showing up there, Maren." I said, "He's my father." He said, "I know. He's still allowed to be wrong about you. And you're still allowed to stop standing in the kitchen waiting for him to notice he is." I tried in the next year 3 times to fix what could not be fixed. The first try was a letter. I wrote it on a Sunday afternoon in February, 4 pages, single-spaced. I went through everything, the science fair, the truck, the $4,000, the open house, the green sweater. I printed it. I drove to my parents' house. I left it on the kitchen counter under a coffee mug, while my mother was at choir practice and my father was at the hardware store. I drove home. He never mentioned the letter. 2 months later, my mother called. She said, "Your father read your letter. He says you have a real flair for fiction." I laughed. I think I laughed. Something came out of me that resembled a laugh. The second try was the open house. Again, the next year. The research facility was being expanded, and there was a public ribbon cutting, and I mailed an actual physical invitation, hand-addressed, to my parents' house. I called my mother 3 weeks ahead. I called her 2 weeks ahead. I called her 4 days ahead. Each time she said, "We'll see, sweetheart." On the morning of, she texted me one line, "Your father isn't feeling great. We'll come next time." There was no next time. There is never a next time. Next time is a word that families use when they mean no, and we don't notice because the word is gentler than the answer. The third try, The one I'm least proud of was money. I called my father in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. I told him I had a problem with my car and I needed advice. I do not own a car that has ever had a problem he could diagnose. He has been an aficionado of Ford trucks for 40 years, and I drive a Subaru with a hybrid engine. But I knew that if I called him about something he understood and I did not, he would have the upper hand he liked to have, and the conversation might go gently for once. He told me on the phone that I should get a real car. He told me on the phone that my car was a toy. He told me on the phone that he didn't have time for this. He hung up. I sat at my kitchen counter for 40 minutes after that. I did not cry. I did not call back. I looked at my own reflection in the dark screen of my phone, and I thought very clearly, he is not going to give you what you came here for. Ever. You can keep coming back to this empty room, or you can go live somewhere else. That was the spring of the second year. And then, in the summer of that year, 3 things happened in quick succession. The first was that my grandmother Ruth mailed me an envelope. No note inside, just a piece of construction paper folded in quarters that I had not seen since I was 9 years old. It was my drawing, in crayon, of the balsa bridge I had built for the science fair, the original. I had drawn it the night before the fair, full of confidence, with little crayon people standing under the arch waving. On the back, in Ruth's pencil in her teacher's handwriting, "Don't ever let him tell you what you saw." I stood in my kitchen for a long time holding that piece of construction paper. I will be honest with you, I had not cried since the parking lot. I cried then. The second thing that happened was that my project, the next one, passed its final regulatory review. We received clearance. The device was approved for implantation across our partner hospitals in the Midwest, including the Cardiology Center in Columbus, where my father, unbeknownst to me, had been a patient for 2 years. The third thing was a phone call from my mother on a Tuesday in August. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was in a conference room. I stepped into the hallway to take it. She said, "Honey, I don't want you to worry." And the moment a parent begins a sentence with, "I don't want you to worry," you know the next clause is going to require you to worry. She said, your father's been having some spells." I said, "Spells?" She said, "Just little ones, just here and there." I said, "What kind of spells?" She said, "His heart, honey. Sometimes it just does a little something. The doctor says he's fine." She did not say the name of the doctor. She did not say the name of the hospital. She did not, anywhere in that conversation, use the word cardiology. I asked 4 times. She gave me 4 versions of the same non-answer. I want you to picture, for a second, what it is like to be a senior firmware engineer on a cardiac rhythm device and to be told by your mother, in vague Midwestern code, that your father has spells. The words atrial fibrillation and ventricular tachycardia and sick sinus syndrome line themselves up in your head like cars at a stoplight. You don't say them. You ask again, "What kind of doctor?" She says, "Just a heart doctor, honey. Don't make it a thing." I made it a thing inside my own chest. I did not make it a thing in the conversation. I'll tell you what I did make a thing of. The blue Tupperware. The blue Tupperware, under the kitchen sink, the blood thinners, the beta blocker, the third bottle whose label I had read 4 years earlier, and then pretended I hadn't. I had not pretended for myself. I had pretended for my mother, because she had not yet been ready to know that her daughter had recognized the nice medications, and I had not yet been ready to be the one who told her what they meant. In engineering, when your model disagrees with your measurements, you trust the measurements. In families, somehow, we keep trusting the model. But there is a moment, and I want to tell you about mine, when the measurements simply will not allow you to keep trusting the model anymore. That moment was the second week of October. I was at my desk. My lead, Dr. Anneliese Vogt, who is German and very direct and who I love, came into my office and said, "Maren, the Columbus site is asking for additional support on its complex implant scheduled for the 11th. Patient with comorbidities, repeat episodes. They want senior firmware on call." I said, "Of course." I had the patient initials on a printout 3 hours later. The initials were CH. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that minute. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the temperature drop in my office. I felt my hands go cold the way they used to go cold before final exams in college. I felt the room kind of tilt sideways for half a second. And then I felt, and this is the part that I'm not sure I have words for, I felt my grandmother's hand on my left wrist, in a parking lot, on a Thanksgiving, 12 years before. when I was 22 and sure of nothing. He's going to need you one day, and on that day, you remember who you are, not who he told you that you were. I sat at my desk. I did not call my mother. I did not call my father. I did not call my brother. I called my grandmother. She picked up on the second ring. She is 85 years old. She still picks up on the second ring. I said, "Grandma." She said, "I know, Bug, I know." That was the first time anyone called me Bug since I was 9. I asked her how she knew. She said, "Because your mother called me on Sunday and asked me to pray. And your mother does not call me to pray for small things." I asked her what I should do. She did something I want you to remember. She did not give me advice. She asked me a question. She said, "Maren, if this were not your father, if this were any other patient on that table, would you walk away from the case?" I said no. She said, "Then you have your answer." I sat with the phone against my ear for a long time after that, long enough that the office around me went dim. And the cleaning crew came through, and someone knocked twice on my door and then walked away when I didn't answer. What I had not told her, what I had not told anyone yet, was that I had spent the previous 48 hours drafting and deleting and redrafting an email to Dr. Vogt asking to be taken off the case. I had 3 versions saved. The most recent one was 4 paragraphs long and used the phrase personal conflict of interest. I sat in the dark in my office and I read that draft one more time. I want to tell you what I saw in it. I saw a woman trying one more time to disappear from a room she had every right to be in. I saw a woman about to let her father's voice decide which surgeries her name belonged on. I saw, and this was the worst part, a woman who, at 34, was still trying to make him comfortable from 12 years and 300 miles away. I deleted the draft. I closed the laptop. I went home. I want to be careful here. I am not telling you that I felt strong. I felt sick. I sat on the floor of my own kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, with my back against the dishwasher and a glass of water in my hand, and I asked myself out loud, "Are you sure?" I asked it 3 times. I did not answer myself the first 2. The third, I said, "Yes." That yes is the only thing I'm asking you to remember from this layer. The work is what saved me, by the way. I want to say that because I think it gets missed in stories like this one. I did not survive what my father did to me because I was strong or wise or unusually well-adjusted. I survived it because I had spent 12 years caring about something that was not him. I had built a thing that he could not laugh at because he could not even name it. While he was telling cousins I was playing on computers, I was learning how to listen to the signal of a human heart and to tell in milliseconds which of those beats was real and which was the noise of a body in distress. It turned out, and this is the cruel mathematics of it, that I had been training for 12 years to do for him exactly what he had spent 12 years refusing to do for me. I had been training to listen, carefully, to the part of him that was still alive. He had spent 12 years deciding in the most expensive way possible that I was noise. But you can build something while no one is watching. That's what this whole story is. That's what I want you to take from it, if you take nothing else. I want to pause here for a second, because if you've been with me this far, you've been with me through the worst of it, and I owe you one honest question before we keep going. I want you to tell me in the comments below, and I will read them. I read all of them. What's the worst thing a parent ever said to you out loud in front of a room? Just the sentence. No backstory. Drop the sentence, and if you can't bring yourself to type it, drop the word heard, just that, so I know you're there. Because what I did next, with my father's life literally on a chart in front of me, changed how I think about every one of those sentences. The morning of October 11th, I drove to the hospital at 5:45. It was still dark. The radio was on, low, a classical station that was playing something with a clarinet, very soft, the kind of music that sounds like it's apologizing to you. I had not slept. I had lain awake from 1 to 4, and at 4 I had gotten up and made coffee I did not drink, and then driven into the office on autopilot and picked up my badge and the chart binder and a thermos and gotten back in the car. I had not told my mother I was going to be there. I had not told my father. I had not told my brother. I had told Tate. He had walked me to the door at 5:30 and held both of my elbows and said, "Whoever you are at the end of today, you'll still be the woman I married this morning." I had said, "That's not a sentence." He had said, "I know. I'm tired." I had laughed for the first time in 3 days. In the hospital parking garage, I sat in the car for 2 extra minutes and looked at my own hands on the steering wheel. They were not shaking. I noticed that with a kind of clinical surprise. I had assumed they would shake. They didn't. I had not been awake long enough to feel afraid the way you feel afraid in the daylight. I put on my badge. I clipped the chart binder under my arm. I walked into the building. The cardiologist on the case was named Imran Saeed. I had worked with him on 3 previous implants. He was a thin, fast-walking man in his late 40s who wore the same brand of running shoe with his scrubs every day. He had grown up in Birmingham, England, not Alabama, and there was still a soft trace of it under his American consonants. He had a habit when he was concentrating of resting one finger on the bridge of his nose and tapping it twice. I liked him very much. He met me in the consult room at 6:20. He said, "Maren, thank you for coming in. This is a complex one. Patient is 64, history of paroxysmal AFib, now showing intermittent third-degree block. Sync up twice in the last 6 weeks, last one with a head injury. We're moving to dual chamber. I want to use the new device. I want you on call for the firmware interface, particularly the rate response algorithm. He's not a candidate for the old fixed rate." He passed me the chart. The name on the front was Holloway Clifford W. I had known it was going to be there. I had known since the day before. I had practiced in my head not reacting. I did not react. But I want to tell you what happened inside me in the second between when Dr. Saeed said the words dual chamber and the second when I took the chart. It was the longest second of my career. I saw, and this is going to sound strange to you, but it's true. I saw the gym at Ashford Elementary. I saw the table where the science fair judges had sat. I saw my balsa bridge in the moment just before it collapsed under 9 ounces. I saw the small grocery bag my father had loaded the broken pieces into. I saw the Sunoco off Route 30. I saw chocolate milk on the corner of a vinyl bench seat. I saw, and this is the one I cannot explain, I saw my grandmother in her parking lot coat, the one she had owned since 1991, with her right hand on my left wrist, in the cold. And then I saw the chart in my own hand and the patient name and the date of birth and the medication list and the EKG strip clipped to the inside front cover, and I read it the way I would have read any chart. Because the chart did not care whose father he was. The chart only cared what his heart was doing. I said, "Yes, I'm on it." Dr. Saeed said, "Good." He looked at me a beat longer than he needed to. He did not ask. He didn't say a name. He simply said, "Surgery is at 09:30. I'd like you in pre-op at 07:45. "All right," I said. "I'm here." He said, "Good. I'll see you at 07:45. He turned to leave. He stopped in the doorway. He turned back. He said, "I have read his chart, you know." He tapped his nose. He said, "I just want you to know I have read his chart." He left. I sat in the consult room with the binder on my knees. I felt the way I had felt in college the morning of my qualifying exams. I felt cold. I felt clear. I felt faintly ridiculous because I was wearing scrubs and a lanyard, and the most dangerous thing I had to do that day was tell the truth and tell it correctly, in the right place, to the right people. At 7:35, I went to the pre-op holding area. My father was in bed 19. The curtain was drawn. I did not pull it back. I waited outside, in the corridor, with my chart binder under my arm. I could hear my mother's voice on the other side of the curtain. She was telling my father a story about a neighbor's dog. It was a stupid story. The dog had eaten a Halloween pumpkin. She was telling it because she did not know what else to say. My mother has always been a woman who fills silence with the closest available sentence. I heard my father say, "Lo, I don't want any end of that fancy computer stuff in me. You hear me? I don't want it." I heard my mother say, "Cliff, honey. The doctor said it's the best option." I heard my father say, "I don't want it." I stood in the corridor and listened to my father, on a gurney, refuse the device my team had built, without knowing it was mine, without knowing I was on the other side of the curtain. I want you to sit in that with me for a second, because that was the moment, more than any other moment in this story, that I had to decide who I was. He didn't know. He was rejecting the device. He was not rejecting me, but the device was me. It was 12 years of me. It was the thing I had built while he was telling cousins I was playing on computers. It was the thing his life was about to depend on, and he was, in the holding area, on a gurney, with his blood pressure on a screen above his head, telling my mother he didn't want any of it inside him. I did not pull back the curtain. I did not say, "Dad, it's me." I did not say, "Dad, you don't know what you're refusing." I did not say, "Dad, the woman you raised has been listening to your kind of heart for 12 years. I just stood there. I let him say it. I let him be wrong out loud, one more time, in front of one more witness, in a room where it was safe for him to be wrong because no one to bruise him, because no one in the room was going to tell him. Then I walked away from the curtain. I went and got a cup of coffee from the machine at the end of the hall. I drank half of it. I came back. By then, Dr. Saeed had come into the bay and had drawn the curtain wider. My father was looking at the ceiling. My mother was holding his hand. Dr. Saeed was speaking very calmly, in the British-American voice he used with frightened patience about why the device was the right call. Dr. Saeed said, in passing, and this is the moment, the one I had been bracing for since the chart binder landed in my hand. Dr. Saeed said, Mr. Holloway, this device is the newest generation. It was approved this year. It's actually being made by a team out here in Ohio. My father did not look up. He said, into the ceiling, Ohio's fine. Ohio, I trust. My mother saw me first. She was facing the corridor. She made a small sound, not a word. Just a sound, and her hand tightened on my father's. My father turned his head. He saw me. He saw the lanyard. He saw the badge. He saw the chart binder under my arm. He saw the scrubs. His face went through three things very quickly. Surprise, then confusion, and I want to be careful here because I am telling you what I saw, not what I have decided to remember. Then fear, a small, fast fear. The kind a man wears for half a second before he can put his real face back on. He said, what are you doing here? I said, I work here, Dad. I'm on your case. He said, on my, what? Dr. Saeed said, Mr. Holloway, your daughter is the senior firmware engineer on the device we're about to place. She'll be in the room during the implant to support the calibration. There was a silence. My father said no. My mother said, Cliff. My father said no. I don't want her in there now. I want to tell you what happened in my chest in that moment. Because if I lie to you about it, you'll feel it. It hurt. It hurt the way a thing hurts that you have already cried about for 12 years and thought you were done crying about. I felt it in the same place I had felt the green sweater seam at Thanksgiving. The same exact place, like a small hot point above my left hip. And I am going to ask you to trust me on this, because it is the most important sentence of this whole story. But the hurt was not new information. I had already known he was going to do this. I had known the day before, when I deleted the email. I had known the night before, on the floor of my kitchen, when I said yes 3 times. I had known when I parked the car in the garage. I had known when I clipped my badge to my scrubs. I had known in a corner of myself that had been awake since I was 9 exactly what kind of man he was and exactly what he would do when his pride and his life sat down at the same table. His pride had said no, and I, for the first time in 12 years, was not going to be the one who tried to talk his pride into something different. I said, that's all right, Dad. I turned to Dr. Saeed. I said, Dr. Saeed, the patient has declined to have me in the operating suite. I'll be in the adjacent room. I'll be on the headset. I'll support the calibration from there, Dr. Saeed looked at me for half a second. He said, understood. He turned back to my father. He said, Mr. Holloway, you have every right to that decision. To be very clear, your daughter's team built the device. The device will still be in your chest. Your daughter will be on the other side of a wall, on a headset. Are you all right with that arrangement? My father looked at the ceiling for a long time. He said, fine. He said it like a man closing a door he could no longer keep open. I left the bay. I went to the adjacent room. I sat down at the console. I put on the headset. That is the moment I want you to remember. Not anything I said, not anything he said. The walk from his bedside to that console. 11 steps. I counted them, because I needed to count something or I was not going to be able to do my job for the next 4 hours. What I was thinking on those 11 steps was this. He used my name to mean a useless girl for 12 years, and today in this hospital, my name on a chart is the reason there is a chart at all. He gets to refuse to see me. He does not get to refuse to be saved by me. I sat down, I checked the firmware build, I authenticated, I confirmed the rate response parameters, I logged in under M. Holloway RNSR, FWNGR. Dr. Saeed's voice came on my headset. He said, Maren, ready when you are. I said, ready. The surgery began at 09:34. It went well. I want to tell you that, because the engineer in me cannot let you sit through this story without being told that the part of it that mattered the most went well. Dr. Saeed placed the leads correctly. The leads sensed, the device responded. The rate response algorithm, my algorithm, the one I had argued about in conference rooms for 2 years, engaged with intolerance. Twice during the case, I had to make a small adjustment from the console, and both times Dr. Saeed said, In the dry voice he used on long cases. "Good catch, Maren." The second time he said it, he added, "Your dad's heart likes your code, Maren." I did not respond. I could not. I was crying, very quietly, into the headset, and I had muted my microphone so that no one would hear me, and I kept making the adjustments anyway. There is a thing they don't tell you about competence. They don't tell you that you can be doing the most demanding work of your life and weeping at the same time, and the work does not get worse. Sometimes, in the middle of grief, the work is the only honest place left. The work does not care. The signal is the signal, the noise is the noise. You make the call. He came out of the OR at 0:13:52. He was wheeled to recovery. His vitals were strong. The device was performing as designed. He was, by every measure on a screen in front of me, alive. I sat in the adjacent room with my headset still on for another 10 minutes. I could not stand up yet. Dr. Saeed came in. He sat down across from me. He did not say anything for a minute. He tapped his nose. He said, "Maren." I said, "Yes." He said, "You did beautifully today." I said, "Thank you." He said, "Would you like to see him?" I said, "Not yet." He nodded. He stood up. He said, "He'll be awake in about 2 hours. I'll let you know." He left. I sat in that chair for 90 minutes. I did not cry anymore. I did not feel triumphant. I want to give you the most accurate word. I felt level, the way an instrument feels level, calibrated. The way you feel when a measurement has finally agreed with a model you have rebuilt 3 times. I felt, for the first time since I was 9 years old, that I was a person whose hands had been used for exactly what they had been trained for, by exactly the person who had once told her, at a Sunoco off Route 30 with a chocolate milk on her knee, that bridges fall, bug. That's how engineers learn which ones don't. He had built the bridge. He had built her, and she had just kept his heart from falling. He did not know that yet. He would not know that fully for 2 more days. But I knew. And I want to tell you something, because I think this is the line that closes this part of the story and opens the next. I want to tell you what I said to myself very quietly in the chair, with my headset around my neck and the console going dark beside me. I said out loud, "Hi, Bug." I said it to myself. It was the first time I had used that name in 25 years. It was the first time I'd let myself. He woke up at 4:11 in the morning. The nurse called me. I had been sleeping in a chair in the family lounge, with my coat over me. I walked into the recovery room. The lights were low. The monitor beside his bed was making the quiet, steady tick of a heart that had been told, by a piece of firmware, when to be patient and when to push. My mother had gone home at midnight to shower. He was alone. He was looking at the ceiling. I sat down in the chair beside the bed. I did not touch him. I did not say anything. He turned his head slowly. His eyes were not fully open. He saw me. He thought for half a second that I was my mother. He reached out his hand. He took my wrist, the left wrist, the same wrist Ruth had held in a parking lot 12 years before. He didn't know that. He couldn't have. But the hand landed where the other hand had landed. I think about that often. When he focused and realized it was me, not my mother, he didn't let go. He said, "Bug." I said, "Yeah, Dad." He said, "I don't know how to do this part." He said it to the ceiling, not to me. He did not say the word sorry. He didn't have it in his mouth. I am not sure he had ever had it in his mouth. But I had been listening, for 12 years, to the difference between a real beat and noise that looked like one, and I knew, in that recovery room, what I was hearing. I said, "You don't have to do it tonight, Dad." He closed his eyes. He didn't let go of my wrist. That was at 4:11. At 7 o'clock, my mother came back. Her hair was wet. She had a bag from a drive-thru. She looked at the two of us, me in the chair, his hand on my wrist, and she sat down on the other side of the bed and she started very quietly to cry. Not loud crying. The crying of a woman who had been holding her face together for 43 years and was finally in a fluorescent-lit hospital room with a paper bag of breakfast on her lap, allowed to set it down. At 9, Dr. Saeed came in for rounds. He went through the discharge plan. He explained the device. He used my name twice, casually, in front of my father, the way he had used it for 2 years in conference rooms. Per Maren's algorithm, Maren's team built this generation. Maren will want you to come in for a 6-week interrogation. The first time he said my name, my father blinked. The second time, my father looked at me. The third time, and Dr. Saeed did not know he was doing this. He was just talking the way he always talked. Dr. Saeed said, "Mr. Holloway, your daughter has the rare distinction of being the only senior engineer in the building. whose name is on the firmware patent of the device that just saved your life. You are, in a very literal sense, alive because of her work. So if you find yourself wondering about the device, ask her. She knows it better than I do. My father did not look at me. He looked at Doctor. He said, useless degree. For one terrible second, I thought he was saying it again. I thought he was saying it to Dr. Sayed. I thought 12 years had not been enough. Then I realized he wasn't saying it to me. He was repeating it to himself. The way you repeat a sentence in court when you finally hear it from the other side. He said it again, softer, useless degree. He looked at the IV in the back of his hand. He said, to no one in particular I said that. Dr. Said did not understand. He looked at me. He had the bedside manner not to ask. He simply said, Mr. Holloway, take it easy. Rest. I'll come back this afternoon. He left. My mother left 20 minutes later to call my brother. She had been putting it off for a day. She closed the door behind her. It was just my father and me. He said, how long? I said, how long what, Dad? He said, how long have you been making this? He moved his hand, the one with the IV, in a small circle over his chest. He could not say the word pacemaker. He could not say the word firmware. He moved his hand. I said 12 years. He said 12 years. I said, yes. He said, I was wrong then. He said it staring at the ceiling. He did not say it to me. He said it to the ceiling, the way some men can only say the truth to a thing that won't look back at them. I had spent my whole life waiting for him to look at me and say it. He never did. He said it to the ceiling instead. I'm going to be honest with you. The ceiling was enough. I said, yes, Dad. You were, he said. I'm sorry, Bug. He said it once. He said it small. He said it the way a man says a thing he is not used to saying. He did not turn it into a speech. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not explain himself. He did not try to make the apology bigger so that it could carry the 12 years. He just said the 4 words. It was not enough. I want to tell you that because I think the wrong version of this story would tell you that it was. It was not. 12 years is not erased by 4 words at 4:11 in the morning equivalent in a recovery room with a wet-haired mother on the other side of a door. But it was real. It was the first time he had said anything real to me since the Sunoco off Route 30 in 1999. I did not say I forgive you. I want you to know that. I did not say it. I have not said it. I'm not sure I will say it the way he might want to hear it said. What I said was this. I said, okay, Dad. I said, get some rest. I sat with him until he fell back asleep. Then I went into the corridor. My brother arrived at 11:30. He came up alone. He had driven from Ashford in the family Ford. He was wearing the company sweatshirt. He saw me in the corridor. He stopped. I want to tell you about my brother. I had not seen him in 14 months. The last time I had seen him, at Easter, he had made a joke about my degree at the dinner table, and my father had laughed, and I had left before dessert. I had not blamed Rhett for that exactly. I had simply stopped going. Rhett stood at the end of the corridor. He looked at me. He looked at the badge on my chest. He looked at the lanyard. He looked at the scrubs. He said, you work here? I said, yes. He said, Dad's heart thing? I said, I'm on the team that built the device. He said, built the device? I said, yes. He looked at the floor. He said, Maren, Mom didn't tell me. I said, I know. He said, He didn't finish the sentence. He sat down on a bench against the corridor wall. He put his face in his hands. He sat like that for a minute. I want to be honest with you. I had been ready for 14 months to say things to my brother. I had a list. I had practiced. I had specifics. The Easter dinner, the truck, the $4,000, the way he had laughed, the late laugh at the Thanksgiving table, when our father had said, useless girl. I had a paragraph and a half ready. I did not say any of it. I said, Rhett, he's going to be fine. The surgery went well. Rhett looked up. His eyes were red. He said, Mare, I'm sorry. It came out of him in one piece. He did not qualify it. He did not contextualize it. He did not make it about what he had been told growing up. He didn't say I was just a kid, or I didn't know, or I was following Dad. He just said it, once. The way our father had said it 20 minutes earlier to a ceiling. I said, I know. That was the second apology in one day. From 2 men who had not given me 1 in 12 years between them. I sat down beside Rhett on the bench. I did not put my arm around him. He did not put his arm around me. We sat the way 2 grown siblings sit when they have spent a long time being told they were on different sides of something that was never their fight to begin with. Side by side, facing forward. Not touching, but on the same bench. My mother came back down the corridor. She saw us. She stopped at the doorway. She did not come closer. She watched us for a long moment. Then she went into the recovery room and sat down beside her husband. That afternoon, I made one phone call. I made it from the parking garage onto the same level my car was parked on in the same spot I had sat in 12 years before. Different car, different garage, same posture. I leaned my forehead on the steering wheel. I dialed. Ruth picked up on the second ring. I said, "Grandma." She said, "Bug." I said, "He woke up." She said, I know. I said, "He said he was wrong." There was a long silence on the line. Long enough that I thought I had lost reception. I checked the screen. I had not. She said, "Did he?" I said, "Yes." She said, "To you." I said, "To the ceiling." With me in the room. She made a sound. It was not quite a laugh. It was the sound of an 85-year-old woman who had been waiting for 12 years to hear that her son-in-law had apologized to her granddaughter and had been told, finally, that he had, but only to the ceiling, she said. He always did have trouble looking up from his own boots. I laughed. I laughed harder than I had laughed in a year. I laughed in a way that turned, halfway through, into the kind of laugh that is also crying. The two are not very different when you've waited long enough. She said, "Maren?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Don't make it bigger than this. The apology is small. Take it as small. Don't make it carry the whole 12 years. It can't. Let 12 years be 12 years. Let 4 words be 4 words." She said, "And don't move back home, Bug." I laughed again. I said, "I won't." She said, "Good, good, go get a sandwich. You sound like a person who has not eaten food since Tuesday." I said, "It is Tuesday." She said, "That's what I thought." We hung up. 3 days later, I drove to Ashford. I went alone, in my own car, the Subaru he had once called a toy, to my parents' house. He was on the couch. He was on the second day of his discharge instructions. The blue Tupperware was on the coffee table now in front of him, where he could see his medications without standing up. I had not been in that house in 14 months. He looked at me. He looked at the doorway behind me. He did not seem to know what he was looking for. My mother had gone out to the grocery store on purpose. I had asked her to. I sat down on the chair across from the couch. I did not take my coat off. I said, "Dad, I want to say one thing to you. I want you to hear it once. I'm not going to say it again." He said, "All right." I said, "You don't get to ask me to forget what you said at that table. You don't get to ask me to come back to family dinners and pretend you didn't say it. You don't get to take the 4 words you said in that recovery room and use them to put me back in the chair I sat in for 20 years. I'm not in that chair anymore. The reason you're alive is also the reason I'm not coming back into that chair." He looked at his hands. He said, "Okay, Maren." I said, "I'm going to come see you. I'm going to come for your follow-ups. I'm going to come at Christmas. I'm going to come on your birthday. I'm going to bring my husband, and one day I'm going to bring my children, if I have them. But I'm not coming as the girl I was. I'm coming as the person whose name is on your chart. You will treat me as that person, or I will be polite and brief, and I will leave early." He nodded. He said, "That's fair." I said, "And Dad?" He looked up. I said, "I'm not going to make Rhett pick a side. He doesn't have to. He never did. But I am also not going to pretend the side you put him on for 20 years didn't exist." He nodded again. He didn't say anything. I said, "That's all." I stood up. I walked toward the door. He said, "Behind me, Bug." I stopped. I did not turn around. He said, "Thank you." He said it once. He didn't dress it up. He didn't ask me what I was thankful for. He said, "Thank you," the way a man says thank you to a doctor who has just told him he gets to go home. I said, "You're welcome, Dad." I went out the front door. It was very cold. My mother was just pulling up in the driveway with the grocery bags. She stopped the car. She did not get out for a second. She rolled down the window. She said, "Did you eat?" I said, "I did, Mom." She said, "Good. Drive safe." That was the conversation we had. It was also more than we had had in 12 years. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar. I opened it on the kitchen counter. It was 3 lines, in pencil, on a piece of yellow legal paper. Maren. I knew. I knew what he was doing, and I never said anything. I was a coward. I'm sorry, Lois. That was my mother. That was the first time, in 34 years, that she had used the words I knew in a sentence about him. I read the letter 5 times. I put it in a drawer. It did not fix anything. It mattered anyway. I'm going to tell you where things are now because I think you deserve that. It is 2 years later. My father is alive. His device is performing. I see him at his 6-month interrogations. Not because I'm assigned to his case ace anymore. That would be inappropriate. But because he asks specifically if I'll come into the waiting room and walk with him to the door of the exam suite. He doesn't ask his cardiologist about the device anymore. He asks me. I bring him coffee, we sit. We talk about the lake he has started fishing on again, since the doctor cleared him for it. We do not talk about the Thanksgiving. We have not talked about the Thanksgiving, not directly, since the day I sat in the chair across from his couch. I think we both know that we don't have to. 12 years is 12 years. 4 words are 4 words. My grandmother was right. My mother and I talk on the phone every other Sunday. She has started, in the last year, to ask me what I'm working on. The first time she asked, I told her about a small project, in plain words, the way you'd tell anyone. She listened. She didn't interrupt. At the end, she said, Maren, that's amazing. It was the first time she had used the word amazing about my work in her life. I did not make a big deal of it. I just said, thanks, Mom. I let it be small. She sends me articles she finds in the Sentinel that mention biomedical engineering. She does not always understand them. That's okay. I do not need her to understand them. I needed her once to know they existed. She knows now. Rhett and I are, I want to say fine, but fine is the wrong word, because fine is the word my mother used for 43 years to cover everything that wasn't. Rhett and I are honest. That's a better word. He calls me on the second Tuesday of every month. He doesn't always have a reason. He has stopped making jokes about my degree. I have stopped flinching when his name comes up on my screen. He came to my house for Easter last year, alone, without our parents, and he and Tate spent 4 hours in the garage talking about a leaking transmission. And I sat in the kitchen with our grandmother and a deck of cards, and we played gin rummy, and Ruth beat me 3 games to 2. Ruth is 87 now. She still picks up on the second ring. She still calls me Bug. She told me last month that she has finally given up driving. Not because I can't, she said, because I don't want to anymore. There's a difference. I think about that sentence a lot. There is a difference between not being able to do a thing and not wanting to anymore. I think most of my family's grief sits inside that difference. The device, the next one, as we still call it, is now in 11,000 patients across the Midwest. The patent revenue funded a second project I'm leading. The second project is about something even smaller and even quieter. I will not bore you with the details, but I will tell you this. The first thing I did when the second project was funded was hire June Petrosky, the friend I had had since I was 8, the only friend from Ashford I'd kept after college, as my new senior engineer on the team. She had been working in Cincinnati. She drove up. She started in October. She brings me a chocolate milk on her first day of every project. She thinks it's a joke. I have never told her it isn't. Tate and I have a daughter now. Her name is Hadley. She is 6. She has my hands. She has my husband's laugh. She is, as I write this, currently obsessed with bridges. Last Saturday, I went to the craft store. I bought a bag of balsa wood. I bought a small bottle of clear glue. I came home. I sat at the kitchen table with my daughter, and we built a small bridge. It was, I want to be honest, a terrible bridge. She is 6. The joints were misaligned. The span was too long for the materials. We tested it on the kitchen counter with a stack of quarters. It collapsed under 9 ounces. She looked at me. She had, for half a second, the exact face I'd had at 9, on the gym floor of Ashford Elementary, with the judges writing excellent attempt on a card I'd taped above my desk for 20 years. I knelt down beside her. I said, bridges fall, Bug. That's how engineers learn which ones don't. She stopped looking like she was about to cry. She looked at the broken bridge. She said, can we build another one? I said, yes, we did. The second one's held 12 ounces. She is going to be a better engineer than I am. I can already tell. Here is what I learned. I want to give it to you straight. I am not going to wrap it in a bow. I used to think that being heard by the people who raised you was a basic human right. It is not. Being heard by the people who raised you is a gift, and some of us are born to parents who are not in the business of giving that gift. And we can spend our entire lives standing at the kitchen counter, waiting for a sentence that is not coming. The sentence is not coming, not from them, not in the form you want. But you can build a life so full of your own work that, by the time they get around to noticing you, the noticing is small, and the noticing is late. And the noticing is, and I mean this without bitterness, enough. It is enough because you no longer need it to be everything. It is enough because you have stopped weighing yourself on a scale they were holding all along. I had spent 20 years trying to be visible to a man who had decided I didn't count. The day I stopped trying was the day he finally saw me, and by then, I no longer needed him to. That is the only sentence from this story I want you to remember, if you remember nothing else. If you are the one who always over-explains yourself to the table that has decided what your name means before you walk in. If you are the one who has been told, in front of a room, that what you do isn't real work. If you are the one who has built something quiet and large, while the people who raised you were telling everyone you're playing on computers, I want you to know this. Keep building. Keep building anyway. Keep building because the work is honest even when the table isn't. Keep building because there is a version of you 12 years out, standing in a corridor at 2:47 in the morning, who will need to remember that she did not stop. Keep building because somewhere, and I mean this, I have lived this, somewhere there is a heart that does not yet know it will be measured by the work of your hands. You don't owe the table your performance, you owe yourself the work. I want to ask you something now, and I want you to take this seriously. I read the comments. I read all of them. Have you ever held something in your hands that the person who doubted you would one day depend on without knowing it? Have you ever quietly, over years, built a thing that the people who told you were nothing eventually walked into without realizing whose work they were standing in? Tell me below. I want to hear it. I want to hear it, whether it ended in a recovery room at 4 in the morning or whether it never ended at all, whether they ever found out or whether, to this day, they do not know. What did you build while no one was watching? I'll be in the comments. I'll be reading. And to the one of you reading this tonight who is still standing in the kitchen, still waiting for the sentence that isn't coming, you are not invisible. You have never been invisible. You have only been mismeasured by people who were holding the wrong instrument. Build your own instrument, then read yourself with it. Good night.